They tried to silence her. They locked doors. They whispered prayers. They blamed sleepwalking, but silence only made the story louder. In 1874, at a small, isolated convent outside St. Joseph, Missouri, something began to happen that no one inside those stone walls could explain, and no one outside was ever meant to know. This is not a story of miracles. It is not a story of faith rewarded. This is a story about secrecy, authority, and what happens when the truth is buried far too deep. The convent of St. Agnes stood alone, a fortress of stone surrounded by open fields and a thin line of forest that marked the very edge of civilization. Life inside followed a strict, unyielding routine: morning prayer before sunrise, silent meals, manual labor, and evening confession. The nuns had taken vows of obedience and silence, and they took them seriously. To question authority was not just defiance, it was considered a spiritual failure. And among them was Sister Margaret Klein. She was 26 years old, quiet, disciplined, and utterly unremarkable, until the mornings began to change. It started subtly, with details that were easy to dismiss. The abbess noticed dirt beneath Sister Margaret's fingernails during morning prayers. Not the usual dust from chores. This was dark, wet mud, packed in deep. A day later, another detail appeared: soil embedded in the hem of her clean robe, as if she had been walking through freshly turned earth. When questioned, Margaret looked genuinely confused, her face a mask of innocence. She insisted she had not left her cell all night. She remembered nothing unusual: no dreams, no visions, nothing. The abbess dismissed it as simple exhaustion. Sleepwalking, she declared, a pronouncement meant to bring comfort. That comfort, however, was brief. Soon, the signs became impossible to ignore. Sister Margaret began waking with bruises blooming on her hands. Thin, red scratches appeared along her wrists. And every single morning, without fail, there was mud beneath her nails. Her prayers grew frantic, her eyes sunken and shadowed. Her voice, once just quiet, became almost a whisper. The other nuns began to murmur amongst themselves, noting that she looked afraid. But what could she possibly be afraid of? One nun, Sister Eleanor, couldn't let it go. Her conscience wouldn't allow it. So, on a cold October night, she made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She stayed awake. She sat in the shadows of the dormitory, watching. Just after midnight, Sister Margaret sat bolt upright in her bed. Her eyes were wide open, but her face was completely blank. She didn't speak a word. She rose, dressed herself calmly, and walked to a door that was supposedly locked every night. It opened without a sound. Sister Eleanor knew she had to follow. Margaret stepped outside the convent grounds and walked directly into the trees. There was no hesitation, no fear in her movements. She walked as if she had taken this path 100 times before. The forest was dead silent except for the crunch of her footsteps on fallen leaves. Then she stopped. She stood before a small patch of disturbed ground, freshly turned soil. She knelt, and she began to dig with her bare hands. She wasn't frantic or crazed. She dug methodically, with a chilling purpose, as if she knew exactly where to dig and what she was looking for. As her hands clawed at the earth, Sister Margaret began to whisper. It wasn't Latin. It wasn't English. The words were unfamiliar, idiomaic, urgent, almost like a rehearsed chant. Sister Eleanor later said it sounded like a confession being spoken backward. Then Margaret froze. She turned her head just slightly, not looking at Eleanor, but sensing her there. And in a perfectly clear voice, she spoke. You were not meant to follow. Sister Eleanor ran. She ran back to the convent, her heart pounding with a terror she had never known. By morning, the abbess knew the secret was out, at least within the walls. Margaret was immediately confined to her cell. Her letters were seized, her personal effects removed, her confessions sealed away from all eyes. The abbess declared, the matter resolved, closed. Just days later, Margaret was transferred to another facility. No records remain of where she was sent or what became of her. The disturbed soil in the woods was flattened, the path leading to it erased. It was as if nothing had ever happened. Sister Eleanor never spoke publicly about that night again. But years later, she wrote a single cryptic line in a private journal. Some sins are buried because God cannot forgive them. The convent of St. Agnes continued its operations. No official investigation was ever launched. No questions were ever asked outside its walls. Authority had spoken, and silence was restored. But questions linger, echoing through the decades. What was Sister Margaret burying in the woods? A body? Evidence of a terrible crime? Or was she burying a memory so dark it couldn't be faced in the light of day? Was she possessed, as some whispered, or was she being forced to carry out a task the convent could never allow to surface? And why did silencing her, erasing her, only make the story echo louder through history? They tried to silence her. They buried the evidence and erased her name. But history remembers what power tries to bury. Because the ground eventually always tells the truth. Thanks for watching. If you want more stories from the hidden corners of history, don't forget to subscribe.